Hey, good afternoon. We have about a dozen people in the room, about 5 people on Zoom. Okay. What I'd like to do is go around the room and have people briefly introduce themselves. I understand there's oftentimes a mix of people with their understanding of the different things we're going to cover. Really good on Spdx and be less. Some people are new to all of it. So, it's interesting, dynamics, but I think it's going to be a great opportunity to find out gaps and to, as we go along, have people fill those gaps, help you fill those gaps. I think it's really important if you guys spend more time talking than I did. It's about injecting your experiences into this discussion. I ask on Zoom, can you hear us well enough?
It's a little bit quiet, but it can be made out.
Okay, if I stand here, can you hear?
Much better.
All right, so what I'm going to ask then, if you briefly, I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I just want to get a sense of where you are. We're supposed to cover a broad number of things today. We're going to touch on OpenChain. For those who aren't familiar with it, we'll do a very brief, 5-minute intro. If you're not familiar with Spdx, and we're going to spend a little more time on the security part of the OpenChain doc. But also, I really want to hear along the way, again, your experiences with respect to these, okay? So what I'm going to recommend we do is we'll start in the room. If you can come up within 6 feet and and just tell us what you're hoping to get out of this. If you say I don't know anything about these topics, that's fine too, right? And if there's a particular topic that you're really interested in, please highlight that. So a few things: who you are, where you're from, what you're hoping to get out of this, and if there's a particular subject here that you're interested in more. Okay? So do you want to start?
Sure.
I'm going to ask you to.
Yeah, I'm Nicole. I'm not sure. I think some people know me here.
Mm-hmm.
Is this on? Can anybody see me, or do you just hear me?
I can hear you. Only hear you.
Hi. I think I'm with OpenChain now for 3 years or something, always popping in and out as I have time. I'm coming from the automotive world. I'm a process and a software person, and just hope to get to know more people. So that's why I'm here in person. So.
Great. Thanks. Would you like to go?
Sure. Yeah, I've only been working in embedded systems since mid-80s, and I've been on different technology. Recently, I did one of the research in cybersecurity. Look at some of the open source and things like that, and I don't probably look
Your name? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I know nothing about OpenChain, and I saw it for security. One time people asked me, what do you do for security in embedded systems? So this is probably a good thing to know.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Joanna Lee. I'm an attorney at a law firm in Gessner Updegrove. I work with those technology companies who contribute to open source as well as the foundation. And I do have a fair amount of experience advising on Spdx because of what I do is help companies and projects with compliance, licensing compliance, and documenting that compliance. I don't have much experience with the other topics we're talking about today. So this is learning.
Okay, great.
My name is Ria Shelnut. I'm an attorney for AWS, and I support our OSCO, and so I'm interested in diving into some of these topics and getting more detail on them.
So my name is Karan, and I'm with AWS OSCO also.
AWS office, okay.
Yeah. And I've been with following OpenChain for quite some time. Prior company was Fujitsu.
and they were huge on that. So that's
Okay.
My name is Nicole, and I am here from from COVID Credentials Initiative. I'm very much interested in the technology behind what it is that makes the magic and the voodoo behind what we do, but I'm also deeply interested in security. And I come here with an open mind and hoping to learn, and I've been very excited by the summit so far. Thank you.
Fun does it mean to dominate the room? Hi, I'm Mark Atwood. I'm a principal engineer in the Open Source Programs office at Amazon, or Uncle Jeff's Bookstore, as I like to call it, and do everything, and we use a lot of open source. So Spdx is important to us. Spdx, XBOM, and OpenChain is we need to learn about.
I'm Tom Calloway. I am on the open source strategy marketing team at AWS, and in a past life, I was responsible for all of Fedora's legal. So I'm sorry, my bad.
Thanks. That's everybody in the room. Can we go one at a time on the Zoom call? Jeff, you want to go?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. My name is Jeff Lush. I'm the director of open source at Peak6, which is a fintech firm, and I have a lot of experience with open source and open source compliance. Started a company called Palamita back in 2004, which was one of the first kind of open source scanning and management products that are out there. So really interested in OpenChain and Spdx, and looking forward to the presentation today.
Hey.
All right. My name is Shane Coughlin, and I am the general manager of the OpenChain project. So basically, I'm here to provide the global insight where I can.
Anybody who's involved in OpenChain or a lot of Linux Foundation events know about Shane. Shane is the guy who makes all of OpenChain run and succeed. So, yeah, those who aren't familiar. Okay. Jacob?
Yeah, this is Jacob Wilson. I work with Synopsys, senior consultant with Synopsys, and I lead our open source service offerings.
Excellent. And Sammy?
Hello, hi, I'm Sami Atabani. I'm the head of third-party IP at ARM and involved in license compliance within ARM, and have been involved with OpenChain since the beginning, 2013, 2014.
Great, thanks. Takashi? Did I get that right?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Takashi Ninjuji from Toshiba, and I'm a chief expert of software technology center in my company. And I'm working on open source programs and in the source. And I'm also interested in Spdx. So I'm looking forward to discussion with you today. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Is it Zika? Or maybe I mispronounced it. Are you on mute? Zika? Okay. Maybe we'll get him to introduce later.
It seems that Zvika might not have audio.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
Okay. Looks like a long agenda, but a lot of these topics are going to be very quick. My goal is to make sure as we go along, if we talk about something like OpenChain, some of the people here know a lot about it, but for those who are new to it, it'll be that high-level, very 10-minute overview about. And then I want to move into more about the relationship between OpenChain and Spdx. I have a simple use case, take a break, then we'll jump a little bit more into SBOMs discussions. Then we'll get into the security guide that the OpenChain project recently published. Okay? So
that sounds great, Mark.
Okay, great. I always like to start off with a simple view of the world that I think we all who work in software understand, but it's always helpful to synchronize and understand that oftentimes many solutions, many modern day solutions, really consist of a large percentage of open source. Okay? And possibly third-party IP, and then you put your company secret sauce on top of that, right? So it's about software, right? That's, and it's about open chain in particular is about building trust in the use of open source in your software. A lot of people think sometimes it's only about the open source stuff. No, it's about software and building trust around your software, your proprietary software sometimes. It doesn't have to be proprietary, but it often is. And then it has this composition, and that's why we need to build trust because there's so many components inside it. Right? I often like to put this up there to say we're entering into a world of containers where it's adding an extra dimension of complexity to the world. And that's probably good for job security for a lot of people here, but it is creating a lot of work. More complexity than we initially had 4 or 5 years ago. Now I want to get into a very brief introduction to OpenChain. Again, I know we had introductions, but just by raising of hands, who here is not so familiar with OpenChain? 2, okay? I'm just going to, but sometimes it's helpful to, I'm going to talk about the spec in particular. OpenChain is a project that, again, led by Shane. And the OpenChain specification is what I'm going to talk about today, which is has a very specific mission, right? And it's to establish trust in open source, from which we build our software solutions from, right? And I always like to emphasize that because that keeps us focused as we discuss OpenChain, the spec, and making sure we're not getting off track, okay? What we do is we simply try to define a set of requirements that anybody who has an open source compliance program should satisfy. We discussed this as a large community, as a group, and come to this conclusion that these are a minimum set. It's not a comprehensive set. A minimum set that we think every quality program should have. And they're high-level requirements. They're not best practices. The good thing about OpenChain is it has a mission also, the project, come up and present a lot of best practices on how to implement and meet these requirements. But many different organizations for the same requirement may satisfy it or implement it different ways. I think that's important to highlight. And so what we do is we deliver that particular specification to benchmark, which each organization can say, how close are we to meeting these basic requirements? That's really good because when you're engaging with another company and they tell you they're OpenChain conforming, and you can establish an extra level of comfort or trust with them when they're delivering that software and they're giving you those compliance artifacts and you feel comfortable about that, okay? Then ultimately, our goal is to convey greater trust around that open source. And the reason why we started to talk about security is because we realized that security is another dimension of trust. It was a natural place if OpenChain is going to focus on building trust around open source. Well, we started out with license compliance, and a natural progression is security. Get to that. So I always highlight OpenChain. I try to describe it in the most basic sense. 6 pillars, right? To meet the OpenChain spec, it's going to say basically you have a policy in place. You have the core education you would expect a company to have who handles open source, around open source. You have roles and responsibilities assigned. Okay? You have, this is really important, and this is kind of a centerpiece for this whole, mini summit today, is the notion of, along the way, everybody creates a bill of materials. Okay? That means for a given software solution, you're identifying all the open source components that go into your solution. OpenChain expects every company that has a quality program to have a bill of materials generated for every solution they ship. Right? Okay. I'm going to pause in a second and ask each of you guys. You don't have to share it if you don't want to, if it's company confidential, but I'd like to see if everybody can share how they manage or they construct the bill of materials. We're going to talk about Spdx, and that's one definitely primary doing it, but I want you to think about that in a second. We'll get there. But again, I think this is very a core piece that everything that we can do at support open source on always starts with the bill of materials. A high quality bill of materials. Hopefully you have processes in place that when you generate your bill of materials, you have a lot of comfort and confidence that it's a quality list. Okay. And then once you have a bill of materials, the natural next important step is to generate compliance artifacts and give you the right to ship that software. Right? You're either gathering up the notices or you're gathering up the source code, and you're giving that all together to give yourself the freedom to distribute your own software, because we know, like looking at the modern software composition, that that's necessary. That's the ticket to shipping from a compliance. Okay. And finally, the spec does also add in this extra dimension to cover what we call community engagement, saying if you have a community, if you engage with the community, that you have a policy, but it's not the focal point of the spec, and we're thinking about possibly breaking this out as another optional piece, which we can then allow it to grow and become more. Right now, it's the optional piece. Okay, so that's, I would say, in a nutshell, how I look at OpenChain. If you look at a company who's OpenChain conforming, you can take comfort that they do all these things. Okay? Any questions about that? Anything that's missing here that you think we should be representing? Okay. So now, I'd like to pause, and I'm not going to go around the room and ask you individually. I'm going to have you volunteer whether you want to offer it or not. How you guys construct a bill of materials within your own organization. You know, and do you rely on putting it into a spreadsheet? Do you have an internal database? And then do you export it out? And how do you share? It's not required that necessarily to share a bill of materials. But what we're also starting to see is more and more customers are asking for a bill of materials. And I'm actually getting them in contract terms to deliver a bill of materials. So open source compliance generally deals with notices and source code, right? The last, I would say, 5 years, it's growing to deliver the bill of materials. So does anybody want to talk about their experience within their company and how they produce bill of materials? And I'm going to turn to the Zoom guys in a second. We'll start with the room here. My first question is, how do you store it? Do you store it spreadsheet? Do you store it in a database? Some basic insights about how you might do that. Different departments do different things. That's okay too. Anybody want to offer it up?
Mark, this is Jeff on the Zoom. I can give a comment there.
Yeah, please do.
Sure. So we use a series of scanning products, both open source and commercial, to manage our use of open source and commercial content. And depending on what process and phase we're in, we'll either use a spreadsheet of the bill of materials to manage remediation and fixing actions, or we'll use the native kind of web interface of the open source management products we're using, kind of manage the steady state and compliance artifacts and generate reports as needed, whether it's to outside entities or inside folks who need a copy.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Anybody else on Zoom want to share their experiences around what they do for bill of materials?
Yeah, it's Sammy here, Mark. As you know, we have a service now application that we use to actually capture information around the product releases that we make, and we also capture sort of information relating to every single piece of third-party IP that is used in that product. And we use it sort of more extensively, not just for compliance, but actually for tracking records of when it was approved and for what purpose and who the approvers were. So creating a sort of track record. And from that, we can then extract the bill of material and the compliance documentation that is required. Again, some of the features are very much manual, others are semi-automated. And for the identification process, as Jeff said, we use scanning tools as part of the review process and capturing information that we identified from the scanning tools.
And great. And is this data stored in a database initially, and then you generate bill of materials out of that? Or
you can, yes, you can. So it's a sort of an approval workflow that stores key information relating to the open source components that we incorporate into our products and how we're using them, and the license information relating to those components. And that is stored within ServiceNow, and then we can extract information out of the database. So, for example, if you want to generate the Spdx license compliance information, we can do that from the database directly. But we do that for every single version of the ARM product that we release. So if you look at any version at any given time, you will see the bill of material of third-party IP that is used in that version of the ARM product.
Great, thank you, Sammy, for sharing that too. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, I think we all are striving for this, and one of the challenges I think we all face is how do you ensure a quality bill of materials, right? And it sounds like Jeff and Sammy are relying on scanning tools to discover stuff, and I think most people would. One thing I will highlight is the spec does not make any mention about scanning because it's considered to be more of a specific to your enterprise, depending on how you do things. We don't want to be too prescriptive, but it's probably done in a large percentage of the cases out there in the world. So, okay. So I'm going to move on, but that's the basic overview of what OpenChain is in a nutshell for those who are new to it. And so I do want to do a brief introduction to Spdx because I believe that was part of the mission of this mini summit to discuss it. But before I go there, the question I have here is, who's not so familiar with Spdx or it's completely new to Spdx? Raise your hands. In the room, we have 2. Okay. On Zoom, is there anybody who's not familiar with Spdx? Okay, so we have 2 people in the room, and let me ask another question. How many people actually generate Spdx? We have 1 in the room. They just want to volunteer whether they generate Spdx data in their company. I'll raise my hand. I've been generating for 8 years now, and Spdx is like what we did, right? It's not for all of the projects. Sure. You don't do it for every project, but you do for some. Yeah. And by the way, OpenChain, I didn't highlight this, but you're OpenChain conforming. You get to decide when you go into the conformance what the scope of your OpenChain performance covers. You could either be an individual product line, be an entire department, or it could be the entire company. It intentionally tries not to assume that you must do the whole company, right? So in your case, in the case of Spdx, it sounds like you're doing it, but you're doing for selective products. Okay, great. All right, so I'm assuming, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Spdx, but for those who aren't familiar with it, it really has 6 sections to it. I'm not going to go in great detail here. We're going to spend a few minutes on Spdx, but you should understand that if you open up an Spdx file, these are the different sections you would expect to find. And very quickly, if you're not familiar, there's some basic information about the document. By the way, I'll show you a quick Spdx file. There'll be what we call basic information about the component or the package, right? Its name, its version, its license. File information, and this is really one of the most important things, is it's information at the file level, every single file that goes into that component. And there's a record for each file. And then there's potentially snippet information, but I'm not sure a lot of people use that right now. I suspect some do, but not the majority of people probably not. Then there's an ability to say, all right, Spdx is a license list, a standard list. Most people here are probably familiar with that list. They probably know Spdx mostly from that list. But if you find licenses that are not in that list, you get to declare them or define them, and that's what the other license section is about. And you can describe relationships between subpieces if you want. Okay. So in a nutshell, that's how an SPX document is broken out. If you want to understand a little bit more, like what you would expect to see in SPX documents, when you look at this gives you a quick highlight of just 3 sections. That's the type of information you would expect to find. So in the case of a document, you're going to find out the version of SPX you're using or you're adhering to. You're going to find out the license that's governing the data that's in the SPX file. You're going to find the document name and the creator, the organization, for example, and whether you use the tool. When you get to the package information, not surprisingly, you expect to find name and version. But in particular also, there's a package verification code. I'm going to take an opportunity to pause on that one a little bit, because I don't think a lot of people use that, but I find it absolutely precious for what we do. And I'm going to ask people here in the room, who's familiar with what the verification code is in SPX? Okay. I don't want to belabor this one too much, but what it is actually, people say, oh, you give me a piece of software, you give me a SHA-1, that's a checksum, you think you have the package. But I've seen the same package come from different places having exactly the same files in it with a different checksum. Okay? And I'm not sure if that's because of it's using the same algorithm, by the way, like TargEZ or whatever. I don't know if that's because they're on different systems. For some reason, it comes up with a different checksum. But if the verification code is taking all the files in there, taking the SHA-1s of those, and then taking the SHA-1 of the SHAs, and you're guaranteed to have, if you have the same set of files, you're guaranteed to find the same set. No matter what. If the same set of files are in there, and you compress it on different algorithms or on different machines, it doesn't matter, always come out the same. And I have found that this has been a lifesaver in recent finding out checksums have been very different, but the files have been the same, and we're able to eliminate the amount of work. Anyway, I shouldn't digress too much on that. But I'm kind of on a little bit campaign to emphasize people to pay a little bit more attention to that, because I think the verification code is going to be critical to knowing that we're all sharing the same software, talking about the same software. The checksum SHA-1s or 256s aren't enough. Okay, moving along, I mean, the package information, clearly you can get high-level information like the top-level license and so forth. Finally, we have the file information, and that's a record per file and information you're finding inside the file. Okay. Moving along, here's a classic example. You will come across BusyBox. Top-level license, everybody knows it as GPL2. But if you actually go into the file, you're going to find a lot more licenses. And if you build BusyBox, you also know, if you're familiar with BusyBox, highly configurable components. And depending on how you configure it will depend on which files are used. And which files are used will determine what your obligations are. And the beauty of Spdx is if you happen to have that information at your fingertips, and you know the configuration that you built, you're very precise in making sure you comply with it. Otherwise, you can comply with all the licenses. So I don't want to get into a debate about licensing, but I'll say one thing is that sometimes it's just not enough to say GPL is enough. Or if you give a written offer for the source code, you may not be complying with all the other licenses in there. So I'll just leave it at that. But I think there's a lot of value here because you have at your I call this high resolution bill of materials because it gives you much more detail down to the file level. And when we get to security, eventually security information at the file level could be really valuable too, because right now we only have it at the package version level. And I think if we had it at the file level, it would be even more powerful. All right, so I'll just show a quick example and we can move on. This is an SPX file, BusyBox. So the licenses here that are in, so we have, remember we saw the document level, right? Here's the documents. And this is kind of, raw data here, but relatively readable. I just want to give you a sense of what it might look like. Data information, in this case, comments, this is our legal disclaimer. So then you have package information, license is found in the package, down to the file information, then you get individual files. Some files have no licensing information in them, and so you have no insertion. Down quickly to like a file like image.c. If I search here, very rich file, it has many, like it has GPL2 in there, MIT, and BSD. But in the open source world, we share a great deal among projects, and we borrow, we build, and we stand on the shoulders of each other, and that's why we're going to end up with this rich set of licenses, which some people look at as a pain, but I look at it as that's just something we have to have in order to have collaboration. So basically, I just want to emphasize is that OpenChain and together with Spdx is a powerful combination because we're starting to create that trust. And the reason why is they both really, I think Kate Stewart did a great job at talking about this in one of the keynotes. She highlighted there's a unifying concept here, transparency, greater transparency. Okay? And I think the way I look at that is those two both provide transparency. We just talked about them. OpenChain gives you transparency to their process, their program, their discipline, right? You want to know if you can trust them. I can tell you, we had a partner company, this was a while ago, and I can't go into details about it, but we liked them a lot. You know, we were using them. We considered possibly acquiring them. Went through a due diligence process. Then after, you know, getting to look at the code from the due diligence process, we got a completely different look of what they reported to us. Okay? So they weren't OpenChain conforming at the time, but it was interesting because when they were acquired and brought in, we had to do a fair amount of additional work, compliance, but the way they reported themselves and represented themselves, it wasn't like they misrepresented themselves. They just said, here's the compliance artifacts, but they weren't nearly enough. Okay. So OpenChain is really about building that transparency into their program and their discipline. Then when they hand off certain data, like that bill of materials, Spdx is about giving you transparency into the actual software around how much of it is open source and what kind of open source is in there, right? And especially from the license perspective. Okay, so I thought I would just give you guys an example. Today, push our compliance artifacts online, and the fact that we organization and that we also this release the compliance artifacts. Remember, OpenChain talks about the compliance artifacts. If you click on here, you'll get to the notice file, and if you the source code, you get the source code, and if you want the bill of materials, you get the bill of materials. And if you want all that Spdx data, the raw data that's important to your own system, we offer that out too. Basically, I just wanted to give you an example where these two can be used together and communicated in this article. The material is going to come up with every single package, Spdx file, both in. How many people are here in the room have all of a sudden felt like there's more work because, or more inquiries into what you do because of the bill of materials? Executive order that has come out from the White House. How many people in the room could raise your hand, feel like they're being requested more because of that event? We have one in the room, only one. I'm raising my hand. Okay, no one feels it. Okay. I think what's happening, I've been participating in a number of working groups, and I see a lot more people coming to the table recently, help work on and come up with standards around what a software bill of materials should be. So I just, from a conceptual perspective, like to, kind of draw analogies every once in a while. And I think in the software world, we have a certain level of complexity that we have to manage better. And so, for example, we think in the hardware world, we can think of a single screw, we can think of a source file, but then you have a like a caliper and a braking system or brake pads, and then you can have the whole brake subsystem, and then that might be analogous to an application. Right? Then you might have the entire engine, that might be the Linux runtime equivalent. Then you could have a container, which might be equivalent to the whole chassis, and then you have the whole product. So I think in the software world, we have to start thinking about software bill of materials actually more complicated than I think we all realize it. It's not sometimes just in a single package with a set of files in it. Does anyone want to offer up some thoughts about the software bill of materials? Do they think this is a unnecessary thing that's being asked? Some people are challenging it, I know that.
I do come from the same. If you don't know what's in your product, it's hard because you don't know it. In advance, what will be in there? You have to ensure it's in there, and you have to know it's in there. Just like that.
I mean, anybody on Zoom want to comment about the software bill of materials and what you're seeing in terms of your organization? Okay. We have a comment. Yeah, I think the question that's being asked is a very valid one, is why should we invest in all this energy? Is there value in it today? Can someone take it and use it today? Right? Can they import it, for example, into their process? Okay, I think it's very fair, and that's a comment that we hear often. Anybody want to comment about why that they agree? In other words, let's have a law that prevents everybody from creating one. In other words, would your life become more difficult?
Coming out of our software build pipeline. I'm on the open source policy and compliance team.
Okay. Does anybody want to talk about how do they see value? I guess the question is, there's a supply chain, right? And yes, you're right. People are generally producing these. The question, I guess, raised here is there value in the rest of the supply chain getting access to that bill of materials? Right, what value they were looking for? Anyone want to comment about that? I'll make a comment about that.
I'm trying to keep my mouth shut.
Hey, Kate Stewart just entered the room.
I basically comment on this ad nauseum. I think fair about it.
Fair, and that's SPDX stuff. Kate is here. So Kate is the founder of SPDX, by the way. So I just told a story about how we were engaging with a partner at one point, and gave me their artifacts. Okay. And when we actually went to try to potentially, to acquire them, we got the opportunity to dive under confidentiality, only to realize that their initial artifacts weren't nearly enough, weren't adequate nearly enough. And I think if I had that SBOM as a requirement, actually obligated them. It's not an obligation, but we could to satisfy obligations. I think SPDX is a great way of doing that, because with the SPDX file, you can include the license notices in your file. It's an option. If you can do both, and give out the SPDX file, you can actually satisfy your. But I think that the mere act, they didn't have this. Let's talk about this company we were looking at. Didn't have a methodical bill of materials process. And I think if they did, they would have discovered a lot more along the way. I think it made me more nervous to deal with other vendors. I wish I could ask them for that. If they enter into a partnership with others. Kate speaking, you have to speak up. Maybe.
No. WSDB. And look up
Just so you know, we are having some difficulty with the audio.
Sorry, I can't speak louder, I'm too tired.
So Kate was telling software packages.
Yeah.
The other place talked about and there is compliance, possibly regulatory needs. We're seeing people wanting to be able to have that level of transparency.
Realize I can move to college.
Okay. That helps. That's where the automobile industry as well is already using them. And, that's why Spdx was created.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment before we go forward? Oh, I just want to just quickly highlight why I see a growing trend in the GSPON world. Basically, customers were asking for it. It wasn't contractually obligated at one point, right? And then we started seeing a growing number of contractual terms. And I would say the last couple of years, they've almost been doubling. And we started out with 2 or 3, and we got like 6. Now with the recent activities around cyber problems, maybe this year we're going to see nearly 12 or something, where they're contractually obligating. I'm not saying those are the exact numbers, but it's kind of in that ballpark we've been seeing. And they've been growing each year. I think, Kate, you were referring to the FDA having some kind of requirement in the medical device world. They have to deliver software bill of materials. And Kate is also involved with the NTIA, the National Telecommunication Information Administration, where they're actually, I would say, at least 30, 40 companies are participating, major players. Probably another 50 are on the sidelines watching. And when I say companies, I'm not saying individuals, I'm saying multiple people can belong to one organization. There are a lot of organizations that are starting to pay a lot more attention to that initiative. And finally, a lot of people here are very familiar with the Biden White House executive order, largely because of the incident. If you're not familiar with the solar wind incident, I highly encourage you to. Okay. So, all right. So now we're going to start to enter into the discussion on the security assurance guide. I'm going to take a moment to let people have a break, 5-minute break, then we'll jump into that. And if you want to come up to me and say, offer me some additional feedback where you'd like this discussion to be going, that you'd like to see more of. So, okay? Because again, it's a broad spectrum of people. Take 5 minutes. So now we'll jump back in.
Extra pressure to also talk about. All of a sudden, you got to teach me the alphabet, and so I hope that you don't feel like you have to, like when you got into the couple. Yeah, but it's so that's very hard for you as your love, and so we always.
I want to give you some private.
Oh, yeah.
Like I say, I do on that. Yeah. I've been doing work on it. Most of the time I do.
I did.
Yeah, generally. Yeah. I mean,
Overhead.
So for those who are on Zoom, we have about 4 people that are still out of the room. We're going to wait 2 more minutes. All right. So during the break, we had a great question. Say your name again, and you can.
Yeah, my name is Kevin, and the question that I had was how we can use OpenChain for internal growth of compliance program in a huge company.
I think it's a great question. And I think the answer, well, I have an answer for that. I think I'd like to pause for a second. If other people want to offer up an answer to his question, being in a OSPO, can this be used internally? Can OpenChain be used internally as a standard to help manage internal groups being more compliant? Anybody want to try to answer that question? I can, but others. The question is, in an OSPO, right, an open source program office, and he's wondering if OpenChain is not just for external between companies and getting trust built, and use it internally and across departments, try to get them to be more the right thing as a standard. Use the OpenChain standard. Do I want to offer up an answer? Okay, I'll go. Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah. If you know what you're doing within the teams, you just lose. You just don't have so much friction, between the projects.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of having a conversation with them. Make sure they're doing the right thing. Because I do think in a lot of companies, a lot of times that work is delegated to the teams, right? Some companies, they have a central group and they go around making sure everybody's compliant. But in a lot of companies, because they want to scale bigger, they push that out to the engineers. Now, you can use it as an auditing tool to say, hey, I'll give you an example. I didn't really give it a formal introduction, but I'm with Wind River Systems, and we are an operating system that is used by many, many companies. We have millions of devices in the world that run our software. We get audited periodically. They come into our company, they want to audit our software processes. They'll say, tell us the big open question, how do you handle open source? And I think it's a great opportunity for us to say, we're OpenChain conforming, here's the spec. A meeting with them, and I go through the spec and say, well, we meet this requirement, and here's the evidence. We meet this requirement, here's the evidence. And we go down the list. This is obviously an external coming to audit us. But if I had to go audit different teams within my company, I would do the same thing. I would take the spec and say, you confirm that you are compliant with this spec. You meet all these basic requirements. And you would possibly expect different teams to do things slightly differently, and that's acceptable. The great thing about the OpenChain spec is that it's not too prescriptive. You give them their freedom, but they must meet the minimum requirements. And then they say, yeah, we confirm. We give you this email sign-off, whatever. And then you can go in and audit them. Okay, periodically you audit them and say, oh, show me the evidence for this requirement. Show me the evidence for that requirement. And you can periodically go around and sample and audit them. And I think it's a fantastic tool for very large companies to use internally. I think it's a great question. Anyone want to add to that? Let's move on to security. Clearly, there's been a lot of activity in the world, and there's growing need for building trust around open source with respect to not just license compliance, but also security aspects. This is a kind of an image we've working off of. OpenChain started out and clearly focused, the spec focused on license compliance and community engagement. These are core pillars really touched on in the spec, 2.0 spec. I always put the bill of materials right there, like what Spdx says, right, as a core foundational piece for many other DevOps tasks, right? So, for example, we talked about this, when you're highlighting security, and when you have to do security, just like in license compliance, you need a bill of materials. And in fact, you get a double bang because you get the return on investment for the license compliance, but now you get to use the same bill of materials and plug that into your security. You're comprehensively going through, and you're checking to see if you're meeting the requirements, security requirements, of a single certain package. Other things that we're not touching on in the open chain, but these are things that we can expand to over time. I just put them out there. Are other areas in DevOps, right, where you take that bill of materials and systematically go over and say, oh, let's do our malware protection analysis or export compliance. I don't know how many people here are familiar with export compliance. Yeah, more than half of the room. So that's another area where we can add value. We're not going there yet, but because the open source packages do it, you want to systematically go through and make sure that you're using all the crypto inside them and making sure you're filling out the forms properly. Okay? This is kind of where we're going. But clearly, security is the next frontier for us. Okay? Clearly. And so this is very similar. Like, so we put together an optional guide. No chain conforming, right? No obligation for you to say, oh yeah, we're also complying with the security guide. That might happen over time that it will stay as an optional piece, but you might be asked by your customers to also comply with the guide, and we'll leave that up to you and your relationship with your customer. But nonetheless, we wanted to treat it in a very much the same way we handle license compliance, more consistent it is with license compliance. When we handle that, easier it is to work with. Right? So, first of all, I want to come back. It's the same mission across compliance, and security, right? What we want to do is we want to make sure that we can build trust in that open source from which you use. So that would be security. And to use the word security assurance. Tech defines that, or the guide, I should call it a guide. It's a separate guide. And again, just like license compliance programs, we're thinking about a program, that you have a program in place that meets some basic minimum requirements. So that's most comprehensive and say you must meet different small things you must do. It says, no, you have a security program in place. Four things everybody who does security expects you to do. And what do we do to do that? We do with a guide. And the result is hopefully to have interaction between companies in the supply chain and the guide around security. I don't spend a lot of time on this slide, but in designing the guide, I want to give people an idea of the guiding principles we used. The same set of guiding principles we used to develop the compliance program spec, right? But this is really important how we developed it. It'll help you understand why we chose to work on certain aspects of security and not others. Right? So, the first point is compared to the second point is really important for us too. We don't want a spec to be overly heavy, right? We want people to adopt it, to use it. And we really worked hard to, at a minimum, by not no longer adding, we're done because we no longer could subtract and have the core minimum still. Less is more in our world. And we focused again on the what and why. In other words, we didn't want to be prescriptive. We didn't want to say, oh, if you do security assurance, you must be doing exactly this or that, right? To their organization's objectives. And finally, we're a function as an open. It's a standard document in a way, but we wanted to do it in an open source fashion. And not surprisingly, then, if we have similar guiding principles, we made sure we looked at the other, the core spec, and we followed similar kinds of things to make sure they're there. We wouldn't be having to do a lot of extra work. So first of all, 5 pillars. There's only 5 here as opposed to 6, but they're very similar. You expect to have a requirement for a policy in place, that you have proper education going on, those who have the ability to impact the software, have roles and responsibilities assigned, and guess what? You have a bill of materials, and guess what? You get to leverage the one you already produced for license compliance. If you want to go straight to the spec, and bypass license compliance, you've got to produce a bill of materials. And then finally, and this is, we're going to talk a little bit more detailed about this pillar. It's about identifying, assessing, and remediating known vulnerabilities. A list of known things that you will. And this is about, and it's very not as comprehensive as people would expect it to be. There's something that happens that we expect all companies to do. Expect them to look at their open source, try to see if there's any of the known vulnerabilities in their open source. I'm asking about the unknown because they have clarify that. All right. So anybody can get access to this guide by going to the GitHub repo, the OpenChain project. It's in PDF and Word doc form. You might want to pull it up now. I'm going to click. Actually, before I go any further, I probably should have. How many people here? 3/4 of the room is raising their hands. Okay. Before I jump into the spec a little bit more, does anybody want to share they're hoping this spec can do for their organization? Right? Talk about the problems they're facing, but they're not quite sure. That's an open source perspective, like open source and security. Anybody want to offer up their experiences?
Legal, everyone now understands after like so many years, people were scared. Now people are getting scared with security. So they are going to
You're wondering if they're going to follow the similar path as the license legal stuff. Okay. Anyone else want to talk about what they're hoping to see with respect to open source and open chain? Yeah, we have no more.
Hi, Mark. It's Sammy here.
Okay. Can you hear Colin here? Can you hear him?
He's regularly auditing and looking.
Hi. Can you hear me?
You.
Can you hear us?
Hi. Yes, I can. So, Mark, I think for me, I think it would be great to see a baseline of what can be done. I think I do feel, at least in our organization, sort of the security aspects around products is very fragmented, and different groups deal with things differently. So to have a clearer process that sort of baselines the activities that the different business groups and different engineering groups are doing would be a great step.
Okay. And I think to your point about different groups doing different things was to the comment we had a little earlier about license compliance and using the open chain spec and trying to get different groups to adhere to a certain minimum set of requirements. Yeah. I think the security is another great opportunity as well, right? Okay.
Correct.
To your point, right? Here's a spec, a guide, and you can at least go around and say, look at this, can you confirm that you can meet that guide? And the guide is very simple. I am not going to deny that, but I think we need to be you want to start out simple and comprehensive. Well, simple in the sense of everybody should be able to relate to what's there and adhere to it. But over time, we'll add in more and more based on the feedback we're going to get.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think one of the other comments, maybe it's relevant to Colin here in the room, and also some of the comments made here just now, that when we looked at security, we talked about different other aspects of security, like the even malware, whether it should be part of security. But we chose not to deal with it now, but we want to incrementally grow there. Okay. I'm going to ask another question. I don't know if it's a fair question, but because it's so new, How many people here in the room and on Zoom have actually looked at the security spec guide? 1, 2.
This one or the any?
No, this one. This one. This one. I'm sorry. This one. Okay, so it's really new to everybody here, I would assume. And on Zoom, I know a number of people here participated in the development of the guide. So we have several people, I believe, Jeff and Sammy and Shane, of course, contributed in a big way to the security guide. Okay, let me proceed on and we'll get into the details of the guide itself. Okay, so this is on page 8. You can go through the whole spec, and it has, again, policy must be in place, education must be in place. We don't need to go over those things, right? I'll jump to the core piece or pillar of this guide, and it's found here. It's assuming, again, a bill of materials, which is discussed earlier in the spec, right? And it's simply asking you to apply a method to detect existence of known vulnerabilities, things that are published. Known vulnerabilities are defined here in the documents. Look in the definition section. But, and then for each one, we assume the company's assigning a risk to it, a risk level. It's up to you to decide how to assign it and what is a risk level, whatever. There's no prescription here about that. Okay? But we assume that you're going through your bill of materials and you're evaluating that component. You're having whatever methods and tools you have to detect known vulnerabilities. And you're asking for a risk assessment. And that, depending on that risk score, you have some documented process that determines how you will respond to that risk level. It's up to your organization to define that. I want to, again, be there to dictate that. But we do believe everybody should be doing this. I'm going to pause for a second. Is there anything up there in the first 3 bullets we just talked about that you think is unreasonable, or you think that it would be too much of a burden for somebody? Or should we assume every good company does this? Is a better question. Is that the right assumption? Not the right assumption. Okay. I'm sorry, we have to, okay. Let me get his question, feedback, and then we'll get to you. Yes, okay, go ahead. Should we assume that this is reasonable to ask, not that they're doing it, but is it reasonable for us to expect, maybe I didn't probably phrase it exactly right, is it reasonable for us to expect something to do this if they say they have security in place? Sure. And that's exactly why the guide exists. Now you can have a conversation with them and say, do you satisfy these obligations? Are you willing to sign off, even on a contractual basis possibly, that you adhere to this, using best practices or reasonable business practices, right? So this is what's great, I think, about the guide. You're right. A lot of people are going to feel like they have their own, they do enough and whatever they do is good enough. But this is a way of saying, let's spell it out. This is a minimum set. And, that you can then go back to them and you can talk to them because we have verification materials, which is evidence they have to produce. Okay, so does that address here? Do you have any other thoughts there? Okay. You had a question over here.
Yes, my question is on the patch level vulnerability, like one component. But when there is a different patch that solves the vulnerability, tracking on component, that creates a lot of extra effort to.
Okay.
So, add patch or figure out how to handle patches.
Okay. So it's a great question. Anybody want to comment on that? He's highlighting the fact that most of the world that works this way, right? The CVE database is all about name of component and version, right? They're saying, well, sometimes we can just be more granular down to the patch. So I would say, first, we're trying to at least go in the direction that the world is going in, but I completely agree with you. that we're not going down granular enough to definitely get this done. In fact, Kate and I have had these discussions on the SDX side. There's a lot of criticism sometimes about, oh, I have to give you all these files. But patches are often at the file level, right? They are the file level, right? And sometimes someone will tell you you're using this component, but you may not be building those files. Back to your point, right? And that, I think, is much more valuable. But the problem also is challenging is we don't have people who are able to come up with the data at that level yet. Right? But, so you're saying we might want to consider somehow capturing that.
Guideline for everyone. And don't put the top level vulnerability scanning or something in this guideline. No one will come to know that that's there is a problem. So,
yeah. I would like to go there. I still think it's prescriptive for where people are today. But I do believe it's like when you have a framework like Spdx, that it allows you to start documenting that information. And I will acknowledge that at some level we do have an analysis process that goes on where we go down to the file level and we record data down to the file level across licensing, security, export, to that. Because we deal with the build, and when you do a complete build, if you know exactly the files that go into your build, and again, I'm putting the serum on you. If you can go down to you had that ability to go down to the build, you can definitely get more. But I don't think we can go there yet as a guide. Because people aren't there and it would be too, I think, burdensome. And I think you're absolutely correct. We have a question.
So, hypothetically, say next week, we go ask Red Hat, revamp our servers. You think it's too soon to ask them to be this?
Oh, no, in compliance with the spec as it is today?
Yeah, and like as you said, like for sure. Now when?
Well, I think this guide is, I believe, guide is correct. It's good enough to go out and ask anybody these requirements. He's recommending that we go a little bit more further and go down to a patch level. I think it would be an excellent path for the world to go, but I don't think we're ready. The world is ready for us, and they'll reject us. But we're going to get there, and I think with OpenChain and where it's going and where SDX is going, we are going to build infrastructure to get people there. It'll take time.
So Mark, I think it might be. Sorry, Mark. Can I just? Can you hear me? I just wanted to give a little bit of context. I mean, we took a very similar approach when we did the license compliance work originally. If you look at the earlier version of the spec, we're much softer, and then you build on that. And certainly that approach has given us a lot of momentum. So the hope is that obviously the security assurance is going to follow a similar suit, and it becomes a bit more robust and a bit more detailed in terms of what you would expect people to do.
I agree with you. I think what you're saying is that we started out in a more primitive way with license compliance, but it has evolved quite a bit, right? And we have to be expecting that to happen on the security front too.
Correct.
Okay. No, I absolutely agree with that. Yes. Okay. Any other concerns about this kind of requirements on burdens on you as an organization or your partners? I don't know. The answer is, Kate is asking if we've done any analysis about some of the requirements that are coming out of the government with respect to security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Processes.
To be more specific and more prescriptive is what you're saying.
Well, I'm not going to. They're putting processes in place. I don't know if and they're classifying things in certain ways, and I think making sure that things that are put in here harmonize is going to cause and avoid problems as much as.
Yeah, I think one thing we'll probably do is stay high level so that we're not too, don't cross the line with them, right? And so we'll always be a little bit, I'm going to say behind. I don't know if that's the right word. But the good news is this allows everybody to have a conversation with their supply chain now around security. And I think this actually adds a lot of value just because most companies are just so far behind or just, yeah. So I think when Kate's touching on is the fact that if you're going to start to engage with the government now, the demands are going to be a lot greater. Right?
I think it's going to be a question of taking a look at the language they're using and the various requirements they're putting in from other frameworks and making sure that we're not saying anything that's going to cause problems.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent piece of advice for us. We should spend a little bit more time as we evolve the spec, or the guide, excuse me, to ensure that we're understanding where the government's coming from and that we're at least highly complementary to them. You know, not necessarily completely. Okay. All right. So basically, also the spec is asking final kind of bullet on the first section where it says post software releases. That's a little bit more challenging, right? But I think it's a huge part of that because let me explain. If it's not clear, when software is developed, we're expecting you before you ship your software to do a check. Check in and see if you have any known vulnerabilities, right? But an even more important step almost is that after you ship and 6 or 8 months later you learn about a known vulnerability, you've got to be able to somehow reach out to your customer base to let them know. Quite frankly, the majority of the times you're going to probably have that kind of engagement because software will ship for several years and things will be discovered after the fact. And I think it's important for an organization to be able to do that, although you do need to have some infrastructure in place. You have to make an investment to be able to not only keep track of everything that you discovered after release, but also a way of possibly reaching out to your customers. So that is the gist right in front of us. This is the gist of the security guide. Okay. Does anybody feel like they have a sense where we should go next with that? Like we don't cover malware, for example. We already have feedback about patches. We have someone like to just go with patch level. That's what I'm hearing.
Level security, not on the code security, like the code and the code quality security that's inside the source code.
Okay. So can you give us an example of what you mean by code security?
Yeah, so usually like most companies or anyone like writing a secure code, they do like some kind of like memory leak check and other things. So this guide is not focusing on that aspect.
Not yet. That's right. We purposely kept it very simple in the beginning to incrementally grow over time, but that's an area where we can go. What do they call it? Threat analysis. Something we don't do. Right? Go ahead.
Yeah. For me, also, this is such a very basic thing here. So it's really let's say, the lowest threshold you should walk over to have, let's say, first idea about the security and pass on the security information. What I'm really would love to see, maybe in addition to this or somewhere else, is, this is about known vulnerabilities. So there's a vulnerability or you just don't know it. But there could it be. So having something that gets a grip about the, let's say, probability that there will be a vulnerability. So, we talk, how do we make secure code? How do we make reliable code? How do we avoid vulnerabilities in the code or in the product itself. So I know it's a lot to ask for. There are a lot of standards around talking exactly about that. There is all that stuff we heard these days about scorecards and all that stuff, and I think that's brilliant. I don't know. We already talked about not every company meets this low threshold here. So, and if we just put it on a mile higher, it will be even harder.
That's right.
But for I'm doing nothing else for the last 10 years telling people, much more, please. Right. You will kill people if you don't.
You know what could be great for you to do? Possibly write a best practice document and alongside it. And the document could easily say, so far we like the fact that we're requiring this minimum, but we think this is another area where you can go include scorecards. So
look into this, that, and if you just dismiss it, okay, then dismiss it, but don't say we never told you.
Okay, so, and I think that's where we can go next with security. You start to get people to start writing best practices, and I want to highlight that again. We're not prescriptive. We're what and why, and not how and when. But we would love to have lots of people write articles about how and when aspects to go alongside the guide. And what we want to look for, though, is when something becomes so basic that everybody should be doing it, and it migrates into the spec, into the guide. These are really great points for us to. We need to do that. We need to talk about our best practice around patches. It's okay to critique the guide and say, the guide is okay, but it doesn't. It would be nice if it went further, right? And we recognize this is. But when you say low, I think we're all going to agree that the fact that so many companies aren't even. And this is the minimum. Like you expect, this is the first step. This is the first step to security, isn't it?
What project somebody just told me 2 years ago. In the end, we want to run, but before we run, we need to learn to walk, and before we need to walk, we need to learn to crawl.
Right. This is crawl.
Yeah. It will bring us somewhere, but.
That's right. So I like the feedback you guys are providing here for us, where we want to go next with this, because maybe we have to start having those papers written. Can you guys still hear us on the Zoom?
Yeah,
flashing red.
We got you.
Okay. For some reason, the lights are flashing red now on the Polycom.
Batteries?
Probably the battery's running low. We'll wrap this up in about 10 minutes, I think. What we really want to try to get out of this is how people feel about this current stack, and I think you guys have helped us. I guess us is we here and everybody on the phone. But now we want to go the next step. What can we do with OpenChain? That mission of building trust around open source.
Security assurance portion of this, or is that a different part of what OpenChain is? It's OpenChain focusing on that in a different vertical of their overall mission. So this morning when we were at Chaos, we talked about the libyear and looking at dependencies and seeing that a project has been updated every 3 months, but it's got a dependency that's 7 or 10 years old in it. The XKCD cartoon model that, if that person wins the lotto and decides to run away and then a vulnerability shows up in that, the whole project falls down. So where would that fit into the OpenChain model?
So that's a great question. So your question is, can we possibly consider how we might have additional activities around security that would be engaging?
Well, no, I'm thinking where does that fit into security assurance, or is that a different OpenChain? So let's just say there's a dependency in your project, and it's a really old dependency that hasn't been updated in a long time. So it's a vulnerable dependency, which ultimately can be a security risk, because if that component falls down, I think of LeftPad, if that falls down, everything falls down with it. And stop working, you potentially have a security issue. So that could be security, or it could be something else. And I just didn't know if OpenChain was focusing on that, or if that is a different vertical, or does it fall here under security assurance?
Okay. If people have some thoughts about it, I have some thoughts, but you make some thoughts about suggestion, about bringing our focus maybe to involve.
Something that I say, it's maintainability and long-term reliability. Maybe another pillar we should maybe ask.
Okay, so you're adding in addition to her point.
Yeah, I think her point has somewhat more to do than not just security. Well, it's not just security. If you want to say, I want to trust my open source components I tools, or I get higher with the message. I maybe also want to know how healthy or what's the age of the components I'm getting here.
Some kind of FICO score.
The whole foundation. Yeah, the idea maybe it would be we can add this chaos aspect to OpenChain as an add-on.
Okay. Wow. So I want you to hold on to that thought. That's exactly where we're going to have a discussion in the next section, the final section, which is where we think OpenChain can go beyond security. But I wanted to wrap up security because we're almost there. I just want to make sure everybody else had any comments. We're all, I want to be upfront that this is not intended to. I know people are going to look at the spec by design. Designed to incrementally grow over time. I think with the world, they're just where they are. Okay. So there's two different questions. One, people feel like too much burden. What is presented here is much to expect. And I use the word expect. I didn't say they've achieved. Okay, so no one seems to disagree with that. It's not too burdensome. They believe it's too thin, meaning there are some additional minimum requirements we should be thinking about security. Now, you did bring up scorecards, right? Now, I'm not sure that's a minimum requirement. Think about, yeah. Okay. So is there anything? So I'm just looking for sort of like assessment of where we are. Did we get it right? That's the question I'm really asking. Two different ways. Or is it not far enough? So right now I'm going to take it as no one feels like gone too far with it. Probably most people think we haven't gone far enough, but they do acknowledge that it's hard to come up with the next requirement. But what would that be? What would the next minimum requirement? You have some thought about that? In terms of security, what is some minimum you think we might want to go and consider next? Getting close to that. I acknowledge it's not an easy question to answer. Right, so deal with all that legacy out there and somehow have a way of dealing with that. Okay. All right, thank you for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on. And we're always open. This is an open discussion. This is not, we're going to continuously listen to you guys, even after. But as I highlighted, guys in gray are not areas we're addressing right now. And there could be others that should be up there. Right? I think you brought up the idea of going beyond security. You have a pillar in here which is called community engagement. Maybe that's where we spend some time thinking about building, and I'm going to come back to our mission. Our mission is trust around open source offers exchange in the supply chain. How can we possibly deal with the community engagement part of it? That was your question earlier.
idea that comes to my mind additionally to this saying let's say community healthiness and age of the project is what we've been discussing a lot, I think, in the last 2 years in Germany is I'm active in groups saying we need more open source. We need more open source in the public, we need more open source in the industry. And there are the other players on the market saying, yeah, but if your project dies, I have nobody who is maintaining it, and if I get a proprietary vendor, I have a contract that they will do this. And if we have something really, let's say, very visible saying, yeah, but this is a healthy project and it's in a shape where you can pick it up and maintain it, then we just take away this fear saying, okay, the project will die and nobody will maintain it. And just you have a measure you can grip on it, it's easy and it's visible.
So you're looking for possibly OpenChain as a project. Because OpenChain has a bigger mission, right? Has a bigger mission to the whole software trust, and it deals with schooling and education and training. So Shane, I don't know if you're able to hear that.
Yep, I'm here.
It sounds like possibility to have the OpenChain project look into more of having the ability to assess and score, people in the community score, and score the community, support around.
There are already measures in place.
Yeah, that sounds good.
What is age-lib? What is the metric that Chaos comes up with? Maybe that's something that we can just...
Sure. Do you have any other thoughts about comments, or you want to expand upon your point earlier? Your point was about what we can do as a project on the community.
I was just thinking about a health score from the perspective of age. That's what you were talking about in Chaos this morning. And then maybe also, this goes with community engagement, how well supported the project is for its maintainability, to your point. That you can count on it being there, 10 years from now or 1 year from now, that it'll still be maintained and kept up to date.
Okay. That's actually great feedback. Okay, so I jumped out to the last slide was, where should we go next, right? Sometimes it's a broader project of OpenChain up. Then there's the actual spec. When I talk about the spec work, I think often about an organization, they have a program. What can we do to put some benchmarks down for the program itself? So you look at that organization, you go, I trust them. You're doing the right thing, licensing or security. So this question was intended for the spec, but it does not mean we can't also entertain project. Let's go. So I'm going to ask that question though. I'm going to go back again. So where are the gray pillars now? We have some comments about community. Maybe we can do more around community. But what about the other gray columns? Malware, export, functional safety. Is there other columns they would like to have here?
One of the concerns I have is just brand awareness. I don't think if you ask 1 in 1,000 open source software developers, much less 1 in 1,000 software developers, if they'd even heard of OpenChain, you'd get their headlights type of response. So I don't know. Obviously, we're trying to having an element or use a dated reference table on electrical.
Okay, so I think your points are more about the outreach piece. I think there is a lot going on, although I think it's early still. I think it just became an ISO standard, which I think is obviously a huge step in that direction. Shane has really in that. And I think there's a lot of activities actually going on. I didn't hear you. Like if you go to most developers, they may not immediately know. But I think there's been a lot of work that has been done with, particularly in the Asia sector of the globe. There's more momentum even there than I think even in the U.S. around awareness and user groups around it. But we have to do more in the U.S. Okay, so that was your thought more about how OpenChain is a project. I was actually asking, and maybe the spec itself, the logo, we need to get somehow the spec logo more visible. But again, is there anything other than that, if there's nothing else that people want to touch on? I'd like to see us go with the spec, and I'd like to see their program, another company's program, be able to sign up to. But again, think about it. You're in the supply chain. You're getting something from some other organization. You want to trust them on some aspect of open source. Some other dimension other than what's listed here. Right now, this is
I think the word you're trying to use is compatibility. I hear what you say, and I think I look for a software system made by a company, and I compare this software with another one that is using kind of the same core components, but with other private code. I make sure that it's security compliance and all the things you mentioned to the open chain. I think I should ask that company if it's open chain compatible. So it's kind of if I picture in my mind a big block, I can see the Spdx file trying to index technology of the company and trying to make sort of things installable in a way that it's automated. So I only need that index to get all the package around the company, and the source seems to be somewhere, but it doesn't matter anyway. Yes, I got the index. And that index is compatible, all the things. It's complying with the security standard and with the license standard. So, as a company, to do well software in the open source, I should invest my resources in to produce this index. That's what I picture.
That's what you're seeing. You're seeing that by trying to be conforming to OpenChain and Spdx and maybe the license side and the security side, build a certain kind of infrastructure inside your company.
Yeah, it's kind of what I imagine when I hear the
You're saying that, and that's again a great possibility for another paper on best practices. In other words, that we can benefit from and put alongside our specs or our guide. Hey, if you build this kind of basic infrastructure or indexing, that you can actually go a long way to adhering to both of these standards. Yeah. Okay. And maybe we need to do a little bit more there on practices. One thing. Okay, great. All right. So, to get to the conclusion here, I just wanted to just say that I don't know if there's much more to have a discussion here. My hope was to somehow create some synergy or some cohesiveness between, right? You have OpenChain spec, you have Spdx, the whole SBOM movement, and our security guide, and how they're all related. Clearly, SBOM is so critical to each of those security and license compliance pieces, right? And it's almost like the SPX is a foundational piece. But again, we do not, I would recommend that people must use SPX. They want to use their spreadsheet representation if they want it. But we believe that by having that there, it's a great place to go. Have something if you want to go beyond that spreadsheet, you want to automate it more and put it in the database. So that was kind of the mission of today. And I think the basic overall arching idea here is transparency. Where you can get insights into supply chains into your companies you're dealing with. Comfortable you can get with that software they're giving you and around the open source. And clearly transparency around license compliance and security. Critical to having a productive relationship. I put this out there periodically, is how I see things might go. But so you see this progression of building trust in the supply chain, and the bill of materials. SDX came out initially as a manifest of licensing and copyright information, but it's transforming into the de facto SBOM standard. And I think with its ISO achievement that it's there, and with the 3.0 coming out version of it, they will be filling in the here. I do think it's interesting. I don't know how many people here are familiar with blockchain, but I think once you have these artifacts, you have artifacts like the notice files and the source code, and you have the bill of materials. Like for the supply chain, you might have to record them on a blockchain ledger. That would be extremely helpful, seeing where something came from and holding something valuable. Maybe that's something we consider in the future. I started to explore this earlier, 2 years ago, but I felt like it was too early. So anyway, just kind of give a perspective, a little timeline here, what's going on, and where we can go. Okay, that. You guys have any other thoughts? Don't hesitate to reach out to me, to Shane, or come into the meetings on a regular basis. A little bit of a validation of where we are with the security. Definitely, thank you for that.
Mark, thank you so much for your exceptional work today in leading this. It's just been fantastic.
Thank you, Shane. Anybody on Zoom have any other comments? Okay, thank you, everyone. And that we actually the conference here